Ryu Min's tattooed hand slammed onto the mahogany bar, the sound like a gunshot in the dimly lit lounge. He didn't look at the three thugs surrounding the waitress. He looked only at her. Ada stood frozen, her lustrous dark hair spilling over her shoulders, her elegant posture refusing to break even as a debt collector's hand reached for her arm. Before the man could make contact, Ryu Min's fingers fisted in the collector's collar, throwing him back like he was nothing. Ryu Min stepped into Ada's personal space, the scent of expensive sandalwood and danger radiating off his tailored suit. His intense, dark eyes scanned her tan skin, lingering on the curves the waitress uniform couldn't hide. He leaned down, his jawline sharp enough to cut, and whispered against her ear, "Don't look at them. Look at me." His hand settled possessively on the small of her back, pulling her flush against his solid frame. The thugs scrambled back, recognizing the dragon ink creeping up his neck. "She's not your collateral anymore," Ryu Min announced to the room, his voice a low, predatory growl. "She's mine." Ada's heart hammered against her ribs. She had just traded a pack of wolves for a lion. Narrator, welcome back to the channel, fam. I am so hyped for this one. We are diving deep into a world of obsession, power, and a love that breaks all the rules. Before we see what Ryu Min does with his new possession, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? London, Lagos, New York? Drop your flag below, and if you love a man who will burn the world down for his woman, hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you don't want to miss how Ada becomes the Queen of Seoul. Let's get into the backstory. Despair tasted like cheap gin and stale cigarettes. 3 hours earlier, Ada had been staring at a stack of crumpled eviction notices in the lounge's break room. Her father's legacy wasn't gold or wisdom. It was a debt so large it felt like a mountain sitting on her chest. She clutched her phone, her fingers trembling as a video message played. It was her father's old associate, his face twisted in a cruel grin. "Your daddy's time is up, Ada. Since he can't pay from the grave, you're the new currency. We're coming to the lounge tonight to collect." She had tried to be invisible. She had worked twice as hard, moving with a refined grace that hid the terror clawing at her throat. She thought if she just stayed in the shadows, she could find a way out. But there were no more secrets, no more hiding places. When the three men walked into the bar, she knew her time had run out. They didn't want the tips in her apron, they wanted her. One of them had reached out, his greasy fingers aiming for her hair, promising a life of literal chains. She had closed her eyes, praying for a miracle. And then the door chimes rang, and Ryu Min walked in. The rain in Seoul didn't fall, it judged. It slicked the black umbrellas of the few mourners gathered at the edge of the cemetery, turning the earth into a hungry, open mouth. Ada stood at the head of the casket, her dark hair plastered to her neck, her tan skin turned ashen in the gray light. She didn't cry. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford when her chest felt like it was being crushed by the weight of the mahogany box lowering into the mud. Her father had been a man of grand gestures and empty pockets. He walked with a refined presence that suggested old money, but he died with the stench of cheap liquor and desperation. As the priest mumbled final rites in a language that felt like static, Ada's mind drifted back to the small apartment they'd shared. She remembered the late-night knocks, the hushed, frantic phone calls, and the way her father's hands would tremble as he checked the locks. She had known there were shadows, but she hadn't known they owned him. The service ended with a chilling brevity. As the other mourners drifted away, a man who hadn't stood with the group approached. He wore a cheap, shiny suit that didn't fit his frame, and his eyes held the dull flatness of a shark. He didn't offer condolences. Instead, he tucked a soggy cigarette behind his ear and stepped close enough for Ada to smell the decay on his breath. "Beautiful service, Ada," he rasped, his voice cutting through the rhythmic patter of the rain. "Your father always did have taste. Shame he didn't have the stomach for his losses." Ada straightened her spine, her elegant posture a shield. "My father is gone, Mr. Choi. If you're looking for whatever he owed you, you're digging in the wrong grave." Choi laughed, a wet, hacking sound. He pulled a crumpled ledger from his inner pocket, the ink bleeding into the paper. "In our world, debt doesn't die with the man, it lives in the blood. He didn't just lose his money, sweetheart. He put up your future as the collateral." He tapped the paper with a grimy fingernail, pointing to a signature that was unmistakably her father's, shaky, desperate, and final. The number at the bottom made the world tilt. It wasn't just a debt, it was a ransom. "You have 2 weeks to find the first installment," Choi whispered, leaning in so close his shadow eclipsed her. "Or the iron snakes will find a way to make those curves of yours pay for themselves. Seoul is a big city, but it's not big enough to hide from us." He turned and disappeared into the mist, leaving Ada alone in the downpour. She looked down at the fresh mound of dirt. Her father hadn't left her a legacy, he had left her a cage. As the cold seeped into her bones, she realized that from this moment on, her life was no longer her own. Every step she took, every smile she gave a customer at the lounge, would be measured in one and blood. She was no longer just a woman, she was a marked asset in a game she never asked to play. The heavy glass doors of the penthouse closed with a silent, pressurized click, sealing the chaos of the Seoul streets away. Ada stood in the center of the expansive living room, her waitress uniform feeling like a costume that no longer fit the scene. The air here smelled of expensive cedar and ozone, a stark contrast to the scent of rain and cheap cigarettes that had haunted her father's funeral. Ryu Min moved with the effortless grace of a predator who knew he was at the top of the food chain. He didn't head for a desk or a throne. Instead, he walked to a sleek marble sideboard and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass. He didn't offer her any. He simply turned, leaning back against the counter, his chiseled features illuminated by the glow of the city lights behind him. The tattoos on his neck seemed to writhe as he tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're wondering about the price," he said, his voice a low, melodic friction. He reached into his inner breast pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He didn't toss it. He held it out, waiting for her to close the distance. Ada's heart hammered against her ribs as she stepped forward, her heels clicking rhythmically on the polished floor. When she took the paper, her fingers brushed his, a brief, electric contact that sent a jolt through her spine. It was a receipt. The total amount was staggering, a number that had threatened to drown her for weeks. At the bottom, in bold, stamped ink, was the seal of the iron snakes, paid in full. "You paid it," she whispered, the breath leaving her lungs in a rush of disbelief. "All of it." "I don't like loose ends," Ryu Min replied, taking a slow sip of his drink. "And I don't like other men putting their hands on what I intend to keep." Ada looked up, her pride surfacing through the relief. "I'll pay you back. I'll work double shifts at the lounge aisle." "You're done at the lounge, Ada." He set the glass down with a definitive clack. "You don't work for them, and you certainly don't work for the ghosts of your father's mistakes. That paper isn't a gift. It's a transfer of title." He stepped closer, invading her space until she could see the flecks of gold in his dark, predatory eyes. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a possessiveness that felt like a brand. "From this moment on, you work for me. You eat when I tell you. You sleep where I tell you. Your time, your loyalty, and every curve of that body belong to the Ryu estate." He leaned down, his lips inches from hers. "You wanted freedom, Ada. This is it. I've simply traded your iron cage for a golden one." The golden cage was even more silent than the grave Ada had left behind. As Ryu Min led her deeper into the heart of the penthouse, the floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a panoramic view of Seoul's neon arteries. But inside, the air felt thick with his scent and the weight of unspoken commands. The decor was a clinical fusion of sharp steel and dark marble, reflecting the man who owned it, beautiful, expensive, and cold enough to burn. Ryu Min stopped in front of a walk-in closet that was larger than Ada's entire apartment. He didn't look back as he spoke, his voice vibrating through the quiet space. "The first rule of this house is simple, Ada. You leave the waitress behind at the door. I did not buy a servant, I bought a centerpiece." He turned, his intense gaze raking over her cheap, polyester uniform, the fabric stained with the sweat of a double shift and the grime of the lounge. The contrast between her lustrous, dark hair and the drab work clothes seemed to offend him. He stepped toward her, his presence forcing her back until her heels sank into the plush white rug. "Take it off," he commanded, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous velvet. Ada's breath hitched, Her pride flared, a spark of defiance in her dark eyes. "I can change in the bathroom, Mr. Ryu." "I am not asking for a striptease," he countered, his face a mask of chiseled stone, though his eyes darkened as they swept over her curves. "I am demanding a transformation. That uniform is a reminder of the men who thought they could own you for the price of a drink. In this house, you wear what I provide." He reached into a recessed shelf and pulled out a robe made of midnight blue silk. The fabric looked like liquid moonlight in his tattooed hands. He held it out, not as a gift, but as a new skin. "Shed the polyester, Ada. Shed the debt. When you walk out of this room, you will look like someone who belongs to the Ryu name." With a trembling hand, Ada reached for the silk. As she took it, Ryu Min didn't let go immediately. He pulled the fabric taut, drawing her inches closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "I have rules for everything, Ada. How you walk, how you speak, and who you look at. But the most important one, you never lie to me. My protection is absolute, but so is my control." He finally released the silk and stepped back, his shadow stretching long across the marble floor. "Change. I'll be waiting in the dining room. Don't make me come back for you." As he walked away, the click of his designer shoes echoing like a countdown, Ada looked at the blue silk in her arms. It was the softest thing she had ever touched, yet it felt heavier than the debt she had carried. She began to unbutton the uniform, the cool air of the penthouse hitting her skin, realizing that while the iron snakes wanted her blood, Ryu Min wanted her soul. The dining room was bathed in a low, amber glow, the city lights outside flickering like distant stars. Ada entered tentatively, the midnight blue silk of the robe whispering against her skin. It was heavier than it looked, a luxurious weight that felt like a constant reminder of the man who had provided it. Ryu Min sat at the head of the long obsidian table, his suit jacket discarded, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal the full expanse of the ink climbing his arms. He didn't look up as she sat, his focus entirely on the bottle of vintage red wine he was decanting. "Sit," he said, though she was already doing so. "The silk suits you better than the debt ever did." As he poured a glass for her, the light caught the intricate patterns on the back of his hand, a dragon's tail that disappeared into his cuff. Ada took a small sip, the wine sharp and expensive, but her curiosity was sharper. "The tattoos," she began, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "They aren't just for intimidation, are they?" Ryu Min paused, his hand still on the bottle. A slow, dark smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, a look that didn't reach his intense eyes. Without a word, he turned his back to her and unbuttoned the top 3 buttons of his shirt, pulling the collar down. The dragon wasn't just on his arms. Its spine arched across his shoulder blades, its scales intricately detailed, but beneath the ink, Ada saw them. Thin, jagged white lines that the needle hadn't been able to hide. Scars. "My father believed that a dragon only earns its wings through fire," Ryu Min said, his voice dropping to a hollow, jagged tone. "He was the chairman before me. He didn't lead with loyalty, he led with a cane. Every time I failed a lesson, every time I showed a weakness like empathy or hesitation, he left a mark. I got the tattoos to cover the shame of what he did to me. I turned his cruelty into my armor." Ada felt a cold shiver trace her own spine. She thought of her father, the gambling, the lies, the way he had signed away her life just to stay in the game for one more night. Different methods, but the same result: children carrying the wreckage of their father's sins. "He died before he could see me take his chair," Ryu Min continued, turning back to face her, his expression unreadable once more. "But I realized that as long as I carried his scars, he still owned me, so I covered them with the dragon. Now when people look at me, they don't see a victim. They see the monster that survived." He reached across the table, his tattooed fingers grazing the back of Ada's hand. "We are the same, Ada. We both come from broken men who tried to break us. The only difference is I've stopped running from my shadows. I've started making them work for me." Ada looked from the ink on his skin to the intensity in his eyes. For the first time, the penthouse didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a fortress where 2 survivors were finally learning how to stop bleeding and start fighting back. The stillness of the penthouse was shattered not by a sound, but by the cold weight of suspicion. Ada was in the library, tracing the spine of a leather-bound book when the heavy oak doors swung open. It wasn't Ryu Min who entered, but Kong, his second in command, a man whose smile never reached his calculating eyes and whose loyalty felt as sharp and thin as a razor blade. "You look far too comfortable in that silk, Ada," Kong remarked, his voice a low hiss that set her nerves on edge. He crossed the room, dropping a tablet onto the mahogany desk with a sharp thwack. On the screen, a grainy security feed showed a figure in a blue robe, the very one she wore now, sneaking into Ryu Min's private office at 3 a.m, holding a flash drive to his encrypted terminal. Ada felt the blood drain from her face. "That isn't me. I was asleep." "The logs say otherwise," Kong countered, stepping into her space, his shadow looming over her. "The biometric override was your fingerprint. Ryu Min is a man who values loyalty above all else, but he is also a man who burns what betrays him. Do you think he'll choose a waitress he bought a week ago over the security of his empire?" The trap was elegant and lethal. Kong had been watching her like a vulture since she arrived, resentful of the way Ryu Min's gaze softened when it landed on her curves. To Kong, she was a security breach personified, a distraction that made his boss vulnerable. "You framed me," Ada whispered, her voice trembling but her gaze remaining fixed on his. "You used the access you have as his lieutenant to fabricate this." "Proving it will be your undoing," Kong sneered. He leaned in, his breath smelling of bitter espresso. "I'm giving you a choice. Pack your things and disappear before he sees this. If you're gone, I'll tell him you ran because you couldn't handle the life. If you stay, I'll tell him you're a spy for the Iron Snakes. And we both know how the chairman deals with spies." Ada looked at the screen, then at the man who stood as the architect of her ruin. For a moment, the old fear, the fear that had kept her running from her father's ghosts, threatened to swallow her. But then she remembered the dragon on Ryu Min's back and the way he had told her they were the same. "I won't run," she said, her elegant posture returning as she straightened her silk robe. "Ryu Min told me the most important rule is never to lie to him. If I leave, I'm confirming your lie. I'd rather face his fire than your cowardice." Kong's face contorted into a mask of silent rage, his hand twitching toward his jacket. "Then you've signed your death warrant." He snatched the tablet back and turned on his heel. As he left, the silence of the penthouse felt heavier than ever, a countdown beginning toward a confrontation that would either solidify her place by the dragon's side or destroy her entirely. The Grand Hyatt's ballroom was a sea of shimmering silk and sharp tuxedos, a place where Seoul's elite gathered to trade secrets behind crystal flutes. Ada stood at the top of the marble staircase, her breath hitched in her throat. She wore a bespoke gown of deep emerald velvet that hugged her curves like a second skin, the fabric contrasting beautifully against her tan complexion. Her hair was swept up, exposing the elegant line of her neck, and for a moment the room went silent. The whispers of high society, the families who viewed her as an outsider, a mere waitress plucked from the gutter, died in the air. Ryu Min was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He looked devastating in a midnight black tuxedo, his styled hair and chiseled features making him look more like a dark prince than a crime lord. As Ada descended, every eye in the room followed her. She could feel Kong's gaze from the shadows of the bar, a predatory, expectant look, waiting for the trap he had set in the library to spring. When she reached the final step, Ryu Min didn't just offer his arm. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing the knuckles where his ring would eventually sit. He pulled her close, his presence a warm, solid weight against the cold judgment of the room. "You look like a queen," he whispered, his intense eyes burning with a pride that made her heart hammer. "Remember what I told you. They don't look down on us because of who we are. They look down because they are afraid of what we represent." A prominent businessman, a man who had once snubbed Ada at the lounge, stepped forward with a tight, plastic smile. "Chairman Ryu, a bold choice of companion. One wonders if she understands the etiquette of such a prestigious circle." The air in the room turned frigid. Ryu Min didn't flinch. He wrapped an arm around Ada's waist, pulling her flush against him in a gesture that was both a shield and a claim. He looked at the businessman, then scanned the entire room, his gaze settling into that predatory chill that made even the most powerful men tremble. "This is Ada," Ryu Min announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "She is not a companion, she is my equal. And in this city, in this life, we do not seek permission to exist. We do not apologize for our power. And above all," he tightened his grip on her, his tattooed neck tensing as he bared his teeth in a sharp, dangerous smile, "we bow to no one." The defiance in his voice was electric. Ada felt the shift in the room. The judgment didn't disappear, but it was replaced by a heavy, suffocating respect born of fear. She looked up at Ryu Min, realizing that by claiming her so publicly, he had made his choice. He hadn't seen the security breach Kong had fabricated, or if he had already decided that she was worth the fire. Together, they walked into the center of the crowd, the king and his queen, leaving the whispers behind them like smoke. The victory of the gala was a fleeting dream, shattered by the cold reality of the streets. 2 nights later, the penthouse felt less like a fortress and more like a target. Ryu Min had been called away to an emergency meeting at the docks, leaving Ada under a trusted security detail. But as the elevator doors chimed in the middle of the night, it wasn't Ryu Min who stepped out. It was a swarm of men in tactical gear, led by the Iron Snakes, the very monsters she thought she'd escaped. The betrayal was silent and surgical. The guards at the door didn't even draw their weapons. They stepped aside, their eyes averted. Kong's work was complete. By the time Ryu Min returned to a silent apartment, the only thing left of Ada was the emerald velvet dress she had worn to the gala, shredded and tossed onto the cold marble floor like a warning. A single note was pinned to the fabric with a jagged knife. "The debt is called in." Ryu Min didn't scream. He didn't break the furniture. He simply stood in the center of the room, his shadow stretching long and jagged against the glass. Then, a low, guttural sound escaped his throat, a sound of a man who had finally let the dragon take the lead. "Burn it," he whispered into his phone, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, calm rage. "Everything. Every warehouse, every front, every street corner owned by the snakes. I want this city to glow red until she is back in this room." For the next 6 hours, Seoul didn't sleep. The underworld watched in horror as Ryu Min went feral. He didn't hide in the shadows. He walked through the front doors of rival dens, his suit jacket discarded, his white shirt stained with the blood of anyone who claimed not to know where Ada was. He moved like a force of nature, his tattooed hands rendering judgment with a brutality that made even his own men tremble. He hunted with a singular, obsessive focus. He didn't care about the police sirens or the political fallout. Every time he struck a match, every time he squeezed a trigger, he saw Ada's face, her lustrous hair, her elegant posture, the way she had looked at him in the ballroom. The thought of those greasy hands touching her tan skin again turned his blood into liquid fire. By dawn, the Iron Snake's primary compound was an inferno. Ryu Min stood before the burning gates, his chest heaving, his knuckles split and raw. He had decimated an entire organization in a single night, leaving a trail of ash in his wake. He wasn't a businessman anymore. He wasn't a chairman. He was a predator who had lost his mate, and he wouldn't stop until the city was a graveyard or she was safe in his arms. The dragon had been unleashed, and God help anyone left standing in his path. The warehouse was a cavern of damp concrete and the metallic tang of old grease, located somewhere near the shipping docks where the city's light died. Ada was bound to a rusted chair, the emerald velvet of her dress now stained and torn, but her spirit remained as sharp as the shards of glass on the floor. Her captors, 3 mid-level enforcers for the Iron Snakes, paced the perimeter, their nerves frayed by the news of Ryu Min's warpath. They weren't just soldiers, they were frightened men waiting for a monster. "He's burning the city down," one of them hissed, checking his phone for the 10th time. "He's leveled 3 of our hubs. We were supposed to be the bait, but it feels like we're the ones on the hook." Ada shifted, the movement intentional, drawing their eyes to her. She didn't plead. She didn't cry. Instead, she leaned back, her elegant posture mocking their frantic energy. "He isn't just coming for me," she said, her voice smooth and devoid of fear. "He's coming for the men who were stupid enough to follow a leader who isn't even here to protect them." The youngest guard, a boy with a fresh scar across his brow, turned to her. "Shut up. Choi said we'd be moved by dawn." Ada gave him a look of profound pity. "Choi is currently negotiating his own life in a bunker across town. Do you really think he's coming back for 3-foot soldiers when the dragon is breathing fire at his heels? She paused, letting the silence of the warehouse amplify her words. Look at the time. Dawn is 30 minutes away. If he were coming, he'd be here. She turned her gaze to the eldest guard, the one holding the keys. You've seen Ryu Min's work. You know he doesn't just kill. He erases. But he values intelligence. If you walk out that door now and leave the keys on the floor, I'll tell him you were the one who kept me safe. I'll tell him you're the reason I'm still breathing. The guards exchanged looks, shifty, desperate glances. The seed of doubt she had planted was blooming into a full-scale panic. She wasn't just a pretty toy or a damsel in distress. She was the architect of their internal collapse. She watched as the eldest guard's hand trembled over the keyring. Choi didn't tell us he'd go feral like this, the boy whispered. Choi lied to you because you're expendable, Ada countered, her voice dropping to a low, authoritative velvet. Ryu Min doesn't lie. He promised to burn the city, and he's doing it. The only question is, do you want to be the ash, or do you want to survive the fire? The sound of a distant explosion rocked the building, dust raining down from the rafters. The guards jumped, their faces pale in the dim light. Ada didn't flinch. She simply waited, her dark eyes reflecting the flickering light, knowing that her mind had already won the battle before Ryu Min ever reached the door. For the first time, she wasn't just the woman he claimed. She was the woman who claimed her own destiny. The warehouse doors didn't just open. They were torn from their hinges as Ryu Min stepped through the smoke, a silhouette of vengeance made flesh. But he didn't find a broken woman. He found Ada standing tall over the dropped keys of her captors, her presence as commanding as the fire raging behind him. The rescue wasn't an end, but a beginning, a final shedding of the shadows that had haunted them both. 6 months later, the air in the private garden of the Ryu estate was heavy with the scent of jasmine and the salt of the nearby sea. There was no neon here, no scent of grease or desperation. Ada stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror, her reflection a vision of fused heritages. She wore a stunning gown of traditional ivory silk, but the bodice was intricately embroidered with gold patterns inspired by Nigerian Ankara, a tribute to the roots her father had almost gambled away. Her dark hair was adorned with gold leaf, and her skin glowed with a radiance that no designer silk could mimic. Ryu Min entered the room, his tuxedo sharp, his tattooed neck partially hidden by a high collar. He stopped when he saw her, the predatory intensity in his eyes softening into a look of pure, unadulterated devotion. He walked to her, his large, tattooed hands settling on her waist, pulling her curves flush against him. The guests are waiting, he whispered, his voice a low, melodic vibration. The city is watching. They want to see the king and his queen. Ada turned in his arms, her hands resting on his chest. Let them wait a moment longer. There is one more secret to share before we walk down that aisle. She took his hand and placed it low on her stomach, over the emerald green sash cinching her waist. Ryu Min froze. For a man who had faced down armies and burned empires, he looked suddenly, beautifully vulnerable. His dark eyes widened as he felt the slight, firm change beneath the silk. A new legacy, Ada whispered, her voice thick with emotion. One that won't be built on debts or scars. Min, a Ryu dynasty that knows love before it knows fire. Ryu Min let out a shaky breath, pressing his forehead against hers. He or she will have your strength, he promised, his voice thick. And my protection, they will never have to run. The wedding was a testament to their victory. As they walked down the aisle, the elite of Seoul bowed, not out of fear but out of a recognized sovereignty. They weren't just a mafia boss and his waitress anymore, they were a foundation. As the sun set over the Han River, Ryu Min kissed his wife, a kiss that was no longer a desperate plea for cover, but a promise of forever. The dragon had found its mate, and the queen had found her throne. The debt was gone, replaced by a love that was, finally, truly, paid in full.